The mirror game. A few years ago, my friend Josh asked me a simple question. Have you heard of the mirror game? Of course I didn't know what he was talking about. It seemed to be one of those questions where the inquirer just asked because they wanted to tell you about it. He always asked me about obscure movies and songs, always aware that I didn't know any of them. That was just the way he was. So when he asked me about the mirror game, I had taken it as just another one of his obscure references. Nothing more than a book or movie that never made it big. I haven't heard about it. What is it? I had asked him. He grinned at me. I'll show you. He got up from his chair and went to dim the lights. Then he left the room, only to return with a knife and a handheld mirror. Whoa, what do you have the knife for? I asked. Don't worry, it's not for cutting yourself, if that's what you're wondering. He sat the mirror on the table and handed me the knife. Before we start, there are some rules that you absolutely need to follow. I nodded. Go ahead. First rule, never let go of that knife. No matter what happens, do not drop it until you hear me say the special word. What's the special word? I will tell you after I finish the rules. Don't interrupt. I rolled my eyes and he glared at me. I mean it. If you don't take this seriously then forget I said anything. Don't treat it like a game. It's called the mirror game though. I thought it was a game. That's just what it's called. I didn't name it. I guess it's a game, but it's still a serious game. Now let me finish. The next rule is do not say the special word out loud or even think about it. Do not even mouth the words or write it down. Bury it in the depths of your mind. Do not say it, even if I ask you what the word is. The third rule, don't go too far from the mirror. You don't have to pick it up and carry it with you, but try to always stay within sight of it. If you lose sight of it, don't panic. Just calmly but briskly walk to where it is. Last rule, remember that you are doing this. Sometimes, I forget him playing the game, but I look at the knife I'm holding and remember I have to go back. When you're playing it, it's almost like it tries to make you forget what you're doing. What type of game is this? I know there are a lot of rules. Just repeat them for me, so I know you got them all. Josh said, hold on to the knife at all times, until you say the word. Don't say or even think about the special word. Stay close to the mirror. Remember I'm playing a game, not a game. Remember you're playing the game. Okay, so what's the word? He turned the mirror so that it was facing down on the table and leaned in close to my ear. He whispered so quietly that I almost didn't hear him. Aliasis. I nodded. Repeat the word, he said. You just told me not to in the rules, I replied. It was a test. You passed. Good job. He then put the mirror back so that I saw my reflection in the dim light and I stared into it. I'm going to walk you through it, and when it's time to come back out, just repeat the steps. It will be a bit different when you do it by yourself, but just remember that you stare into the mirror itself, not your own reflection. It shouldn't take as long though. I took a deep breath in. Stare into the mirror. I began staring into the mirror as he said. I also began to question his sanity a bit. I mean, who even comes up with this stuff? 5 minutes into the staring contest between myself and the mirror, I began noticing strange things. My body started to tingle slightly, and my reflection began to look more transparent. Josh, is it normal to see changes in the mirror? Yes, it's normal. I gripped my knife harder. I was staring so deeply into the mirror, it felt as though I was getting pulled into it. Josh, I called out. What the duck? I heard from his kitchen. It was my voice. How is that possible? I whispered to myself in shock. Hey, who are you? The other me yelled as he walked towards me. I held the knife out, almost dropping it, because of how much my hands were shaking. Don't come any closer, I yelled. Tell me what's going on. The other me stood still, hands in the air. Why don't you tell me? This is my house. My vision started to go dark around the edges. I was hyperventilating. I needed to calm down. Go back into the kitchen, I yelled. The other me slowly walked away, hands still in the air. As soon as he left my sight, I looked into the mirror and I tried to focus. Josh hadn't explained how to get back. Then I heard it from the other side. Aliasis. It was hard to concentrate when I was so focused on the other me being somewhere behind me, but I eventually felt that pull, and I realized I was back on my side of the mirror. "Josh," I yelled. He looked at me and smiled. "Trippy, right?" I dropped the knife and punched him hard in the jaw, causing him to fall over. "What the duck was that?" "Hey, relax," he said, scrambling away from me. "What do you mean relax? You could have killed me. Get out of my house." "Wait, don't you want to know what that was? You should have told me what that was before sending me there, you asshole. Would you have gone if I told you what it was? Would you have even believed me? It doesn't matter. Why would you even think of doing that to someone? Especially a friend? I didn't think you would get so angry." "Yeah, right. You didn't think. Let me just explain, okay? Yeah, I've got 2 minutes." He sighed. "I found the game online. I thought it looked kinda fun, but I didn't think it would work. When I did it for the first time, I did it alone. It's a bit different when you do it that way. Harder to come back. I actually didn't realize I had crossed over until I noticed myself standing behind me. We talked for a while, but he was acting really weird, so I went back to my side of the mirror. I did it a few more times as the days went on, and I realized that he was trying to get to this side of the mirror. I haven't done it since. I think you get about 5 times to do it, maximum 10 minutes each time, before they start to try to trick you into staying on the mirror side." "What? Yeah. No, I mean, explain more." "Oh, well, he would try to get me to watch a movie or go outside for a walk with him. He wanted me to get as far away from the mirror as I could. Did you happen to look outside at all when you were there?" "I don't think so. Trust me, if you did, you would know. The outside is weird in that place. It looks normal at first, but the farther you look from the mirror, it's just really creepy." "What do you mean?" "It looks unfinished. Like a sketch. Actually, exactly like a sketch. Or a rough draft. I looked out the window, and the end of my street was white like paper, and the houses were inked outlines. He really wanted me outside. I think he wanted to get me outside the house, so he could run back and lock the door for full access to the mirror. Why wouldn't you tell me that before sending me over there? You wouldn't have gone." "Thanks for explaining. Take the mirror out of my house and don't ever come back." "Come on. Don't you find it interesting?" "No." He looked disappointed, but he took the mirror and left. I haven't seen him since. Sometimes I wonder if he ever played the game again and got stuck inside the mirror. I've moved on with my life, and I hope he has too, but every once in a while, I swear my reflection has a mind of its own. The more you stare. My father works 2 jobs, so you can already tell. Willow on money point. We sometimes have to move around a lot and try to find better houses for better prices. My mom works in a kitchen at an elementary school and I'm only in middle school, so we try our best to stay in one town at a time. Point by the end of the school year my mom had found a cheap house for us to live in near the South Point. I begged and pleaded for us not to move because I had so many friends and memories in the current town we lived in, but they denied all of my issues as me being stubborn. Once we moved and arrived at the house, I must say I was impressed. It was quite a lot bigger than the previous one we had, but a lot more secluded. When our stuff was unloaded off of the truck, I immediately started to unpack my things. I'm a very independent person, so I was able to unpack all of my stuff and hang up all my posters by lunchtime that day. The only thing left was my TV and bed, which my father said he would do later. Thankfully there were no new people I had to introduce myself to, but that wasn't on my mind at the time. When we were pulling up to the house, I saw an abandoned one just sitting across from us. It intrigued me, and I wanted to explore it. I imagined no one had lived there in years, so I thought it would be fine. I went back outside and headed towards the house when all of a sudden I got this weird feeling in my stomach. Not nausea, just a bad feeling like something was wrong. I stared at the house one more time, and the more I did, the more I noticed how bad it was. There were actually many cracks in the walls. The door was busted down. The windows have been shattered. Some of the roof was missing, and I couldn't shake the feeling something was in that house. Not an animal or a person, but just something. I decided to go back inside and entertain myself another way. It was a Sunday, so my dad had gone back to work after lunch, leaving just me and my mom. She said she had to go to the store and she wouldn't be back for a while. and asked if I would be okay by myself. I know we just moved here and all, but we can't order takeout forever. Besides, this gives you some time to explore. I watched as my mom walked out the door and drove off, leaving me alone. A few minutes go by and that's when I heard it. The unusual pattern of knocks at the front door caught me by surprise as I started to walk back to my room. As I went up to the door, I kept wondering who could been here in such a short amount of time. Who knew that we had just moved in and how. I looked through the peephole and to my surprise saw a girl about my age standing there looking around. She wore her long black hair in braids with red ribbons at the end. Her white shirt with a black peace sign on it matched perfectly with the black skirt she was wearing. She wore silver round glasses that reflected the sun. Oddly enough, she reminded me of my mom. The mystery girl knocked again in that strange pattern and I opened the door. Hello there, I'm Carrie. I saw you guys pull up to this house and I wanted to greet you all. Something about this girl didn't sit with me. If she had seen us coming, why did she wait until I was alone to come drop by? Oh yeah, we just arrived here a while ago. I'm Samuel. Where do you live? I asked nervously. Oh, I don't live that far, she explained. Just a few minutes down the road. I hadn't realized. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me as she was talking. Carrie smiled. You know they say that the house over there is haunted. She scoffed as she pointed to the house across from mine. Do you like that sort of stuff? I nodded and explained my love for all things horror to her. Carrie asked if I wanted to go inside with her and I immediately agreed. Somehow I wasn't disturbed by her or the house anymore. We quickly ran over to the house and stopped at the busted down door. I peered inside and was more shocked to see what was inside rather than out. The inside of the house was surprisingly clean and appeared to be taken care of. Carrie noticed my expression and pulled me inside quickly, like she didn't want anything else to be seen. I've been trying to fix up this place for a while to make it into some sort of hangout spot. No one has lived in this house for years, so I thought what's the harm? For a frail girl, she was incredibly strong and pulled me all the way up the stairs. This house was taller than mine, having 2 stories and apparently more elegant. I was able to only get glimpses of what was around me and was awed by how much work had been done to fix this house. She had brought me to a room that was quite similar to a girl's bedroom. I like to work on this room the most. To me this room feels comforting, like mine at home. There were a vast amount of beautiful paintings scattered across the walls, each one more unique than the next. A navy blue couch sit up against the wall next to the door we entered from. In front of it was a fairly sized TV up against the wall. In the middle of both was a little glass table with a few books and a remote laying on it. In a glimpse I noticed all of the books were horror novels, specifically murder mysteries. Carrie immediately snapped her fingers to grab my attention. Back to her. Hello, Earth to Sam. You okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Just taken back by how cool this room is. We headed back downstairs when I noticed a room that I cold sworn I never saw before. Even worse, the more I stared at the door, the more I noticed how old and rusted it was. The door handle was barely intact and would most likely fall off as soon as someone laid a finger on it. I was slowly reaching the door handle when I was suddenly yanked away by a strong force. I thought it was Carrie, so I turned around to complain, but she wasn't there. I was standing outside the abandoned house. I walked back to my house questioning whether or not what just happened was real. I got inside and found my dad sitting at the kitchen table. Hey kiddo, where have you been all day? Your mom said she was going to be out for a while, so I decided to end my shift early. I grabbed a water bottle from the fridge and started to put grape flavoring in it. I've been at the house across the street all day. This nice girl named Carrie came by and asked if I wanted to explore it with her. She said it was haunted, but in reality she's planning on turning the rundown house into a hangout spot. Carrie's already done so much to it. Isn't that just so cool? My dad laughed. That sounds great, Samuel. But you don't happen to have a crush on this mystery girl, do you? Dad, come on now, I exclaimed in embarrassment as I went back into my room. My bed had been put together and a pair of sheets and a blanket lay on top of the mattress. I put them on and went back into the kitchen to see my mom enter in with a bunch of groceries. Once we ate dinner we parted ways back to our rooms, and after a while I went to bed dreaming of living in the house across the street when it was all fixed up with Carrie. Just her and me. The next day I woke up pretty late in the afternoon To find my parents gone. I checked my phone and saw my mom had texted an hour ago saying that they would be gone for a while doing errands. I got dressed and walked to the kitchen for some food when I heard a familiar sound. I grabbed a banana and rushed over to the front door to greet a pretty face. Carrie stood there wearing a pastel green shirt and jean shorts. Her hair was down and she was wearing a green headband. Ready to go. We ran over to the old house and walked inside. I immediately remembered what happened yesterday and grabbed her hand before she could walk up the stairs. Hey, so when we went downstairs I found this old looking door over there. I began slowly as I pointed over to the door by the stairs. I was gonna ask you about it, but you kinda just disappeared. What's up with that? She looked at me confused then smiled nervously. Oh, that room? Yeah, right. No, I need to fix that door. I've just been storing a bunch of trash in there. I've been meaning to do something about that, but I've been distracted with other things, completely ignoring my question about her disappearing. She walked over to the kitchen area and beckoned me to follow. I still had the creeps about the door and that so-called trash room, but I walked away from it anyways. The kitchen was huge along with the living room, and the countertops had tiny potted plants all aligned in a neat row. Carrie grabbed chocolate bars from the fridge and handed them to me. Can you hold on to mine? I gotta check on something. I started eating mine while she walked away from sight. I went to grab my phone when I realized I left it in my room at home. I started to gaze around when I saw Carrie had left the fridge open. As I went to close it, I froze in my tracks with pure terror. I stood in front of the fridge, but all the food was old and rotting. Flies flew over disgusting black fruit as the light inside flickered on and off constantly. I closed the fridge and looked back at the living room. I wish I hadn't. The big TV on the wall was barely hanging on. Its screen was shattered with glass all around it, and the wires were all disconnected. The velvet red couches had holes in them, and they seemed so beat up. The wallpaper was tearing off, and the actual walls were stained yellow with age. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder quickly turn me around. There stood a worried Carrie now with both of her hands on my shoulders. Oh my god, Samuel, are you okay? I saw you about to faint while I was walking back in. What the hell happened? I suddenly got that same feeling in my stomach when I first approached the house and saw Carrie for the first time. Oh, and fine Carrie. Really, I just remembered I have to do a lot of chores at home. I'll see you later. Before she could say anything else, I rushed out of that place and ran all the way home. I quickly locked the front and back door out of paranoia and sped to my room. I grabbed my laptop and began to type. Effects of staring at something for too long. I scrolled through pages and pages on so many different websites until I found it. The title of an article read, "The more you stare, the higher your death rate increases," in big bold letters. I clicked on it and was immediately taken to a website about the unknown. The supernatural, if you will. Sightings upon sightings of a creature known to play with your mind has been seen all throughout the state of Texas. It craves attention and will mess with its victims until they drop. The creature mostly goes for rundown buildings, abandoned houses or campsites, and has even been reported to attack an old classroom and an occupied school. The very few victims who have survived attacks from this mystery creature claim it calls itself by the names of loved ones they've never known about. That select amount of survivors all have the same story. They meet a mystery person that knocks on their door in a strange way. Then they spend time with that person in abandoned and rundown places until they realize how bad it is. This creature can turn anything bad into a fanciful world, but if you stare at a certain area for too long, you'll see how awful the place you're in really is. Multiple victims have been found dead in said rundown places. Their heads have holes drilled in them. Their brains have been mushed and stirred with wooden sticks. Some victims have been found with numerous body parts severed off and eaten almost entirely. Be careful you don't encounter this rabid creature. Underneath the paragraph was a huge list of names who I assumed were dead victims. Amy Ludenstein, Leon Willis, Brody Mack, Justin and Justine Campbell, etc. Suddenly I heard the door unlock and people enter the house. My dad called me for dinner and I sat at the table, nervous to ask the question that had been rattling in my brain for so long. Do we have anyone in our family named Carrie? My parents stopped eating and looked at each other. Well, I suppose you're old enough to know about her. My mother started. Yes, we do. have a family member named Carrie. In fact, she's my sister. We were identical twins. We both had long black hair and the same round silver glasses. As much as we looked alike, we were both fairly different personality wise. Mainly, she wasn't mentally okay. She was taken to many places, and, actually, by your age, she decided to jump off the overpass while our family was on a trip. We didn't tell anyone about Carrie because of all the gruesome things she would do to animals and sometimes almost to people. How did you know about her? I froze in my seat, stunned by what I was just told. I regret ever opening my mouth in the first place. I excused myself, ignoring my mother's question of my knowledge of her deranged sister. I ran to my room once more and opened the curtains to my window. I peered outside and fixed my gaze on the house I thought was safe. It looked horrifying in the dark, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Carrie was watching me through the little window in her personal room. The next few days weren't how I imagined them going. No new knocks on the door, no people walking in and out of the house, and thankfully no Carrie. 3 months go by, and, to my surprise, my dad had found a better house for a better price in our old hometown. I was relieved we were moving, and immediately began to pack. Soon enough we left our house in the south and moved back home. I recently turned 23 this week and decided to revisit our old secluded home. I remembered everything clearly and reread the article I found about Carrie all those years ago. When I approached the house, I didn't get that strange feeling in my stomach anymore. The house we lived in hadn't had any newcomers, so I figured that it got lonely, seeing as how whatever creature she was craved attention to survive. I walked in and almost immediately broke the doorknob. The walkway was composed of old, rotting, decaying wood. The kitchen and living room were the same terrifying old messes they were those many years ago. I walked up the old withered stairs and up to the hangout spot above. The open area reeked of decaying animals like squirrels, possums, and rats. The room she had turned into her own was even worse. There was dried blood everywhere, all over the walls and floor. The pictures were ripped apart, the couch was beaten and torn, and the TV was shattered into millions of glass shards. There were chalk body outlines all over the floor, like you see in those detective movies. I looked over to the glass table and noticed how it was somehow still intact. I examined the books that were once ghost stories, had turned into something completely different. They were murder cases. I flipped through each one, reading every name aloud. Henry Mattox, Marion Keggins, Scarlett Hill, Peter Jacobs, Carl B. Stevenson, etc. Then I stopped at one I recognized all too well, Amy Ludenstein. That was one of the girls' names in the article. I dropped the cases and rushed downstairs until I was met with my worst nightmare. The old rusted metal door stood before me, its doorknob laid at my feet. I forced my way in and was greeted with a strong putrid smell. What I saw before me was probably one of the most gruesome scenes I had ever witnessed. Carrie's idea of trash surely met up to her expectations, was all I could think. Numerous bodies were sprawled across the room. Many were severed in half, eaten, had holes drilled in their heads with sticks, or all three combined. The names of each victim was written in their own blood on the ceiling. I read each one, slowly realizing how many names there actually were. 25 names in total. That's when I saw the most horrific thing. Sprawled against the wall opposite of the door, in big letters that were scratched into the wall, was the name Samuel Simmons. Everywhere I looked my name was scratched deep into the wall with blood, splatters on letters here and there. Up against that same wall was a melted chocolate bar, the one I assumed Carrie gave to me when I was only 15. I walked out of that house and immediately called the police about my discovery. They arrived shortly, and I told them everything about how I used to live here, about the house, about the cases, about the bodies, and about Carrie. They told me that this wasn't the first time someone had reported something like this, which didn't really surprise me. After reading about those dead kids, how could the police not be involved? They thanked me for the information and drove off. I got back into my car and sped off as quickly as I could away from the nightmare. I slowed down once I was on the highway and tried desperately to take my mind off of it, when all of a sudden the image of Carrie's appearance when we first met popped into my mind. She was just standing there smiling, but then her smile got wider, spreading from ear to ear. Her skin started to rot and decay away, revealing Charcoal black skin. Her once beautiful eyes had sunken deep into her head and became black empty voids as she grew taller and thinner. I snapped back into reality and was thankfully still at the red light. I sighed a sigh of relief as it turned green and started driving again. Hey, do you hear someone knocking? Hey, thanks for watching and don't forget to subscribe.